Hey, so I was having a chat with someone earlier today, and the subject of check-ins in remote meetings came up. And this is something that we were doing a lot with the guys I was working with for the last 6 months or so. Um, and the idea of a check-in is basically that there's almost a facilitated beginning of the meeting where everyone goes around the room, which is not something that's normal to do in in-person meetings. I suppose you might go around and everyone introduces themselves by name and stuff, if you don't know each other, but it's not that usual in in-person meetings. But I think it's really important in remote meetings. So kind of prerequisites for what I'm going to talk about now are that everyone is on a video call on Zoom or something and has gallery mode on, and that folks feel comfortable being just a little bit vulnerable. And essentially, with that setup, a check-in is just a facilitated way of going around a room and getting everyone to kind of talk. And there's loads of ways that you could do this. We often used to just go around and be like, hey, everyone gets like 30 seconds just to say how they're feeling. And generally, the focus was on how you're feeling in general. Certainly not on status updates, like what have I been up to today. It's a case of like, hey, say hello, how you feeling, what you've been up to, and again, deliberately going around the room doing that is what's important. There's also stuff like in big meetings, we often used to do a number and a word. So I can't remember where we got this from, but like a number on a rating of like 1 to 10 of how you're feeling in general, 1 being absolutely shitty and 10 being on top of the world, and then 1 word that describes your meeting. And that's super quick because it takes like 5 seconds to say that. And if you get everyone to nominate the next person around as well, everyone says 3 words and you can get around pretty quickly. We also sometimes used to say like, what one thing that's making you grumpy at the moment and one thing that you're grateful for. And there's 1,000 other things you could use as long as they're short. I guess the big thing is to keep it really simple though. This it's not meant to be a reflection session. So like, why is this useful? I think firstly it forces everyone on the call to be present and to speak out loud, which is something that often some people won't ever speak out loud during a meeting, particularly larger meetings. And it also encourages openness and honesty. It encourages a bit more of that kind of bonding, which you would naturally get if you were in the same room by a bit of chatter beforehand or just by being in the same room, right? So I think forcing everyone to be present and to engage their mind and to think a little bit about how they're feeling now and then to try and share that. Everyone has to speak. Everyone has to get their video on and engage with the other people. It's a really good way to kick off a meeting. It also acts to kick off the meeting with an emphasis on openness, trust and empathy, which often carries through the rest of the meeting, and is obviously a good thing. And yeah, like we don't have visual cues and stuff to help with that bonding when we're not in the same room. This was like a really big thing for me in the last company I've been at. It's been super useful for me in all sorts of ways. Being able to just share that kind of stuff, it's helped us build a better team, but it also helped me just feel a lot more comfortable sharing a bit more about myself because every time we had a meeting, we'd do something like this. I think it's a great idea to use this kind of check-in if not everybody knows each other, and also if a group kind of is a big group or meets infrequently, less than twice a week. I think it's probably not necessary to use check-ins like this if you've got a tiny little team that talks together multiple times a day and knows each other. It doesn't need to be so formal then, and it probably doesn't need to be facilitated. I also think that there's times when it's not sensible to have a check-in like this. And a couple I've come across is impromptu meetings which were called to solve a very specific problem, as in people get in a room, make a decision really quickly and then leave again. I think that there's not always necessary to do this kind of thing then, and it can almost detract from like the speed of solving a problem. And also, if there's a big white elephant in the room, right? If you're going to ask, hey, what's making you grumpy? And you know that everyone in the room is grumpy about some big thing, and there's people that are a bit pissed off, is maybe not going to serve your purpose well to like force everybody to go around the room and talk about how they feel. So I think if there's big white elephants, maybe get them out of the way first and then do a check-in. In terms of introducing this in a company or in a team, it tends to work better if a facilitator explains how it'll work and also why. And ideally, someone who feels comfortable goes first. And then for the first few times, a facilitator can kind of prompt and control who goes when, and remind people to unmute when they forget and whatnot, to try and keep it kind of short, and also maybe use some prompting questions if somebody kind of stops talking. But after a while, this kind of behaviour should get habitualised by teams that do it, so that doing a check-in is just natural, and people will nominate the next person to go themselves. In that case, the facilitator just needs to make sure that nobody's forgotten. So yeah, I guess things to watch out for that I've seen when trying to use check-ins, like not giving enough time for it. If there's 10 people in the meeting, it's fine if this takes 10 minutes. Like, if you've decided it's important enough and useful enough to do, make sure you actually give it time. And it's okay if there's a little bit of silence when someone's checking in, because they're pausing to think about what they want to say. The point is, if you're going to do this, it should be an important point in the agenda. It should be written on the agenda as a thing that happens in that meeting. It's also really easy to descend into chit chat, right, which can exclude some folks, especially if you've got like a little subgroup of the meeting having a chit chat, and some other people who are maybe not so involved in what they do, that they might feel excluded. So it's important to like, for the facilitator to control any backwards and forwards. I've also seen busy people not taking it seriously and thinking that it's not worth doing, and that needs a bit of coaching probably. And also in teams where it maybe feels a little bit awkward to maybe have your video on in the first place, and it feels a bit awkward kind of sharing stuff, it's well to just remind people that it sometimes is a bit awkward doing something like this. And then I guess top tips, like put it as a standing agenda, like I said. It really helps with this if you can crowdsource the agenda for the meeting before the meeting, and that's good practice anyway, right? But if you do have to crowdsource an agenda for a meeting, it's probably better to do that before doing a check-in, because otherwise you get a load of people arriving at the meeting and their brain is like, this is what I want to say at this meeting, and they're thinking about that rather than thinking about the check-in. So it's well to get that out of their heads and onto the agenda, and then spend your 10 minutes on a check-in or whatever. And it's also, this should go without saying, it's also really, really powerful way for leaders and managers to kind of set an example for openness. So, I've been on a call where a CEO has said, yeah, I'm having a really shit day because I'm feeling really overwhelmed at the moment, and talk for 2 minutes about that. And that sets a really good tone and it doesn't feel that bad because everyone's going around the room saying how they feel. So it sort of fits in the meeting. So anyway, I've waffled a little bit about all that, but essentially, when you're working remotely, consider using a kind of deliberate facilitated check-in at the beginning of your meetings.